powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, this is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher's in the house on a Mosher Monday as we take a look at some Birds things this offseason. Projections on the 53. You got, obviously, a lot of stuff rocking this summer when camp comes around. Going to be some cool battles there. We're going to take a look at a couple of them now. Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the latest podcast from the guys. You can check that out on all your podcasting platforms. And Geoff Mosher's back for another edition of Football at 4 here on a Monday. What's going on, Moshe?
Michael, how are you, my friend?
Well, you know, it's been an interesting day. A lot of people looking at blowing up the franchise, the Sixers over here. Meanwhile, the Eagles, everything seems to be going well for them. They've got a lot happening there. We've been talking about their offseason here. One of the things, when you look at the Sixers, you watch that game yesterday and you see a team, you're like, how do you just not have it? And you see the Eagles, they lost a disappointing game, but they left everything they had out on the field. You see the difference between a team that seemingly is right there and a team that has a lot of questions when they lose.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I don't think you come out of that Super Bowl and question. When you talk about the most important player on the team, like Joel is to the Sixers, you didn't come out of the Super Bowl thinking, I don't know if Jalen Hurts really has what it takes. I mean, of course, we can talk about the fumble, but that really is sort of, that kind of stuff happens in a game. But he 4 touchdowns overall and over 300 total yards. I mean,
right.
He certainly showed you he can play at that moment.
Right, Moshe.
He showed up.
They lose the game, but you didn't question your guy. The moment wasn't too big for him. I think that's the takeaway is, hey, we learned a lot about Hurts in the loss, was that he was the best player on the field in the loss. Like if Joel Embiid scores 40 and they lose, you look back and say, okay, they lost 110-104, but my best guy went down swinging. That didn't happen yesterday. But when you look at what the Eagles did, I think that's why you should be feeling good about going into this season and what this season may be, is because in the biggest moment, your best player showed he belonged.
Yeah, 100%. I hate this element of sports. It's natural. There's nothing wrong with it, but it only feels like maybe 4 or 5 years ago when Joel was really starting to come into his own, that he was like the coolest Philadelphia sports athlete because he was out there on the playgrounds in the city, just hanging with regular folk, playing basketball. He's always had a cool personality. But and this almost seemingly happens to every Philadelphia athlete. It happened to McNabb, to those who start off with this great rapport with the city, but then eventually, because they don't play big enough in the big games, that they become the enemy. And I hate to say it, but, you and I, Mike, we're old enough where we can almost see it coming, right? Like, I was thinking about those days when Joel was the most popular guy in the city saying, this is only going to last for so long if he doesn't win a championship. And now we're already at the point where people are already done with the Joel Embiid era. And that's always the sad part of sports. And obviously, if the Eagles don't continue to perform well with Jalen Hurts going forward, if for whatever reason they take major steps back, it'll be the same thing for Jalen Hurts.
Well, didn't we see it with Carson Wentz? I mean, get on the Wentz wagon.
Sure.
This was the guy until he wasn't. And the second he wasn't, he's a bum, and you wanted him gone.
We saw it faster than I think we ever thought we would see it for a guy who played the way he did in 2016.
By the way, I don't know if you saw these today. The Super Bowl exact matchups. Do you know what the best odds for the matchup is for Super Bowl 58?
I didn't see it. I would imagine that it would probably be this is all Vegas related. Eagles have such a tough schedule. I can imagine them thinking that the Niners have a better statistical path, and then maybe the Chiefs, Niners Chiefs.
Philadelphia, Kansas City is the best odds, 19-1. San Francisco, Kansas City is 22-1. But then Philadelphia, Buffalo, Philadelphia, Cincinnati. You've got 49ers, Buffalo, 49ers, Cincinnati. Then it's Dallas, Kansas City. Then it's Philadelphia, Miami. Then Philadelphia, the Jets. Philadelphia, Baltimore. So Philly is in a bunch of these as the best odds. So again, they seemingly enter the season as the favorite. And as the schedule got released last week, is it fair in your mind when you look at that schedule? I mean, they got a daunting task that the team – this might be like some of those Phillies teams where the team – well, I guess the Phillies teams – the best team won – the best team didn't win the World Series. But will this team be better but have less wins?
Very possible. It also is possible that the Eagles are not better than last year's team, have fewer wins, but win the Super Bowl. Sort of like the Chiefs last year were not the best version of the Kansas City Chiefs we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. They're still very good, but you could argue that 2 or 3 years ago they were a better team. So it all remains to be seen. Obviously, they're rebuilding their defense, so there'll be some question marks there. And that schedule, there's no doubt about it. Coming out of the bye, it is fairly brutal. With that, well, I guess, 5-game stretch where you've got Kansas City, San Francisco, Buffalo, Seattle, Dallas, New York. That's a really difficult 6-game stretch right there.
Geoff, you wrote about Sean Desai over at InsideTheBirds.com and got a chance to hear his press conference. And I'm interested, we try to take stuff from these press conferences, but did you learn something about him that intrigued you about what he might bring to this team? Because a lot of people look at Sean Desai and say, hey, this is a guy whose defense is going to be very similar to John Gannon, a guy who, quite frankly, wasn't very popular. And I don't know if that was because of his style of defense, maybe that he was a hate to face, maybe they just didn't like the guy. Whatever it was, he was not a likable guy. Did Sean Desai come off as a kind of guy that will be a little bit more likable and that his defensive style might be more endearing to the fans? Not that that really matters.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both know that he will not be likable if his defense isn't good. It doesn't matter. He can be the nicest guy in the world. If the defense stinks, coach at Temple, student at Temple, coach in Boston College, has his roots here in the Northeast. He has an understanding. I mean, he was at Temple at the same time that we were seeing the end of the Jim Johnson era here in Philadelphia onto Sean McDermott. So I do feel like Sean has a pulse. He has his finger on the pulse of what Philadelphia likes in a defense. Now, that doesn't mean he has to cater to it, but when he says, I want you to feel the defense, not only on the field, right, not only our opponents, but people watching at home want it to be palpable. I thought that was a good way of telling the home crowd here that he's a little bit different maybe than the guy before, that he understands that there's a connection, and there always has been in this city, that is fairly unique between the defensive coordinator, the defensive identity, and the city itself. And as I wrote in that column that you're referencing, there really has not been a defensive coordinator who I think really got the adoration of this city since Jim Johnson. Now, Jim Schwartz, I think, was sort of liked, but, there was always this he doesn't blitz enough thing, and he was also a little bit eccentric. So I'm not sure that people really felt Jim Schwartz. They may have liked how his defense played at times, but I don't know if they connected with Jim Schwartz. And again, is connection important? No. I mean, if you just go out there and put a good defense out. But Jonathan Gannon put the number 2 defense out in the league, and you could tell that people just still didn't like him very much. And it just feels like Sean Desai has a little bit more of an understanding of what he wants to present both on the field and off the field.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with you. I don't think Schwartz, towards the end, was the most likable guy either in terms of the fans. Again, he was another guy, got a lot of sacks. They hated the sticks defense. He would say, well, the guy sacks the quarterback. He gets to the quarterback. Well, too many 3rd and longs. It seemed that it was always something that was just like, hey, I just don't like this guy. For whatever reason it is, I don't like this guy. So Desai comes in, and, you say he's got a very Northeast, but I guess the message to the fans is, hey, he might be saying some of the right things, but you're going to see his defense out there, and you might not like this style of defense either, even if it's rated very high, much like John Gannon's.
Right. And I'm really curious to see, spent some time talking about the importance of sort of catering the defense and the personnel, and that he's excited about what he's got. But make no mistake, like, he's not in the driver's seat here. Like, he's not inheriting the number 2 overall defense. He's inheriting a defense that lost both of its starting safeties, both of its starting linebackers, a starting defensive tackle that had, 12 sacks last year. So there's a lot of production from last year's number 2 defense that is not going to be there this year that he has to now inherit and preside over. So he doesn't, for anybody who thinks that he's like hand-delivered some great defense, that is not the case.
Yeah, and he made a reference to the 70 sacks. He's got a lot to live up to get 70 sacks and not be a well-liked coordinator when you got the 70 sacks.
Well, that's what I like what he said. He said, look, 70 sacks is amazing. You have to give credit where it's due. But then he also quickly said, but, this is a new year. This is a new team. And I don't think he's just pointing out that the personnel isn't the same. I don't think he's trying to give himself a free pass. I think he's just trying to say, well, every year you have to prove yourself. You have to earn whatever title is given to you from the media, the fan base, or the rest of the league. And I believe he enters that part of his job here knowing that he's got to put his fingerprints on this defense starting now.
Yeah. Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, Inside the Birds podcast. A couple things to stay on the defensive side of the ball. You and Adam talked about on the latest Inside the Birds podcast is some depth situations that he, the coordinator, is going to be looking at here. And, they've got the defensive end spot where, obviously they got to find another guy there. You've got the tackles where it seemingly is a lot of depth. But how about that linebacker spot? There's not a lot to choose from there. Are there any names that might be surprises in your mind that the listeners should be looking for when they get to camp that have a shot in your mind to make this team?
Well, I think the rookie free agent they signed from Michigan State, Ben Van Sumeren, has a, better than a puncher's opportunity to make the 53. And not because he's going to be so great, but again, if you look at their starting situation right now, unless Howie Roseman makes another move, which I think is possible, but, we're only judging on what we know now, your starters are Nakobe Dean and Nick Morrow. Okay, I know we expect a lot from Nakobe Dean. We should. Hopefully he locks that down spot. I don't know what to expect from Nick Morrow. I mean, he's bounced around a little bit. He's had some nice years. But we see with these undersized linebackers, they kind of go from team to team. And, if they're not put in the right positions, they get exposed. We've seen that with the Eagles before. So after that, though, I mean, Sean Bradley and Davion Taylor, Davion Taylor was on the practice squad last year, so he's certainly not guaranteed on the 53. Sean Bradley has been a special teamer, and just an okay one, not a great one, but certainly a replaceable player. So you look and say, well, who are your backups going to be at this spot? I mean, you have Nick Morrow, you have Nakobe Dean, then I think you've got probably Ben Van Sumeren, because teams typically like to go with at least what they think is upside over what they already know. They know Sean Bradley really just gives you special teams acumen, and it's been 2 years now, and he hasn't really cracked the defense. And we know that Davion Taylor is disappointed in his opportunities to play and then didn't even make the team last year either. So you're looking at an opportunity for Ben Van Sumeren to make the team, along with maybe one of those other two as a backup inside linebacker.
I know when you guys did the podcast, you and Adam said it took him 10 minutes to go through the corners. When you look through those corners, number one, does it take you 10 minutes to get through the whole list of guys? And how many of those 10 minutes worth of guys are legitimately in play here?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a great competition. Now, you can lock, obviously, the top three in Bradbury and Slay and Maddox. We both locked in Zach McPherson, not because we're so impressed with what he's done. He has been a good special teams player, but he's probably the only guy they got other than Josiah Scott that can play the slot corner position. And we know that's important because Maddox has missed so much time at that spot. So the other guys that they've kind of stockpiled are all 6'2", 6'1", 200, 205. They're outside corner. Greedy Williams is an outside corner. Keely Ringo, outside corner. And Josh Dobe is a guy who's big enough that some people. So we penciled in McPherson as your number 4. Ringo, being a draft pick, should be your number 5. So if you keep 6 corners, it really then comes down to Greedy Williams, who you signed to a 1-year deal with not a whole lot of upfront money, and then Josh Jobe, who made the 53 last year, contributed on special teams, got hurt, has some versatility. I went with Jobe. Adam went with Greedy Williams. Honestly, we're just projecting right now. That's going to be something that competition bears out in the end. But, and then we didn't really even have a talk about Mario Goodrich or Eli Ricks. or some of the other names that they've run in that position.
Yeah, I know that competition is always a good thing in terms of bringing out the best in others. You just wonder, are you bringing out the best in a lot of mediocrity? Is that a spot that, regardless of who wins that position, it will go into the season, if as is, Moshe, as maybe a weakness, the depth of the corners?
Depth, probably will. So, but that's not, sort of news for this organization. It's never really had great depth at corner for a long time. But at least, at least they're trying. They're trying to stockpile. But they've been doing this for a couple of years.
Well, it felt like a couple of years ago. It felt like a couple of years ago, It felt like a couple of years ago they made a bunch of trades, and every trade they made, it was like a baseball team that makes a trade and just says, hey, send me back a single-A arm just to have a guy. They were getting a corner in every deal just to have a guy.
Yeah, it was like Tay Gowan in the Zach Ertz trade, and then there was Mac McCain, and then there was somebody else from the Broncos whose name escapes me now. I mean, they were trying. They were throwing darts and hoping that somebody would stick, and none of them really did. And, that's why they had to go out and get James Bradbury last year.
Yeah. Last thing on the defense, let's look at safety. You guys talked about Justin Evans, who they signed, been hurt a lot. Kayvon Wallace was a draft choice. A lot of people liked him at the time. He was Clemson, on those championship Clemson teams. Is this the end of the road for him?
I mean, it very possibly could. You're probably going to keep 4 safeties, especially if one of your 6 corners you think you can move or play hybrid safety position. So, I mean, obviously you've got Terrell Edmonds and you've got Sidney Brown, the kid they drafted in the 3rd round. Reed Blankenship showed you enough that he should be at least considered your 3rd safety. Well, who's your 4th safety? So it could be Kayvon Wallace or Justin Evans. Competition will bear that out. I think athletically, if he's healthy, Justin Evans is a better overall athlete than Kayvon Wallace. The kid's had trouble staying healthy, so obviously he's going to have to do that in spring training or training camp to hold off Kayvon Wallace.
All right, there's a little look at some of the things that are going to be happening this offseason. First look over at InsideTheBirds.com. Take a listen to their full podcast to get their thoughts on the 53-man projections. You got some good names, some new names, some names to keep an eye on from Geoff Mosher. We'll have plenty more this week. On Football at 4, of course, counting down the days till training camp. I can't believe we're already thinking about training. I mean, the calendar's going to be June here pretty soon, and we're 15 days into May. We're halfway through May. We'll get into June, and then by July, might as well already be thinking about getting back to camp and get ready for the 2023 Eagles season. Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. All right, bud, we'll talk to you.
All right, don't you rush my summer, Mike Gill, okay?
I'm not. I won't do that. Yeah, listen, I got scorched the last 2 days. I feel like it's already like August 15th. My face is pink. I've been out in the sun so much, so it feels like summer is in full swing. And I can't wait. Hopefully we get a chance to see Moshe down on the beach this summer. You got to get you back down on the beach there, Moshe. All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Thanks to Geoff Mosher, Football at 4. The Inside the Birds podcast. Check that out on all your podcasting platforms. Adam Kaplan's here tomorrow. Moshe's back on Wednesday.